They fired me 2 weeks before Christmas. 2 weeks later, everything unraveled, and they came crawling back. I watched the collapse start quietly. Then the regulators noticed first. Their calls kept coming, but they had no idea what was coming next.
This is what happened next.
They fired me 2 weeks before Christmas. 14 days later, they called begging me to come back. I said no. Let me tell you what happened when they realized I wasn't bluffing. My name doesn't matter now. What matters is this. I spent 14 years making sure a fintech company didn't collapse. I was the person who kept them compliant, legal, safe from regulators, and they got rid of me like I was nothing. 18th. That was the day. The COO called me into his office, told me my job was being eliminated. Budget cuts, restructuring, the usual corporate garbage. I asked who would handle compliance. He said they'd figure it out. I asked about the federal audit coming in January. He said they had it covered. I didn't argue. I signed the severance papers, walked out, went home, and I waited. Because here's what he didn't know. I was the only person in that building who understood how anything actually worked. The systems I built? I was the only one with full access. The reports they filed every quarter? I ran those manually because they never gave me budget to automate them. The audit they said they had covered? They had no idea what was coming. And when the federal government shows up asking questions, you better have the right answers. They didn't. 2 weeks after they fired me, everything started falling apart. And I watched it happen from my couch. My name is Sarah Mitchell, 42 years old. I built Meridian Financial Technologies' entire compliance infrastructure from nothing. Started there when the company was just 50 employees operating out of a cramped office in downtown Chicago. Back then, we were scrappy, hungry, trying to compete with the established payment processors. The CEO hired me specifically to keep us out of regulatory trouble. Because in fintech, one compliance failure can shut you down overnight. Federal penalties, state licensing revocations, the works. I spent over a decade making sure that never happened. Built the audit systems, the reporting frameworks, the internal controls that kept us aligned with FDIC requirements, state money transmitter laws, and federal anti-money laundering regulations. I made it all work. And here's the thing about being really good at invisible work. When nothing ever goes wrong, people assume nothing can go wrong. They forget you're the reason it's working. About 2 years ago, the company started changing. We closed a Series C funding round, brought in new investors from Silicon Valley who cared more about growth metrics than operational stability. The board started pushing aggressive expansion targets, new product launches, geographic expansion into markets where our regulatory infrastructure was already stretched thin. And then the CEO's son joined the executive team, Ryan Calloway, 34 years old, MBA from Kellogg. Spent 3 years at McKinsey working on strategy decks that never touched actual operations. His father wanted to groom him for succession, made him chief operating officer within 18 months. That's when I knew we were heading for trouble. Ryan was the kind of executive who lived in dashboards and investor presentations. He'd show up to leadership meetings talking about operational efficiency and cost optimization. But he didn't understand how the company actually ran. I tried explaining it to him once. Walked him through why our compliance infrastructure wasn't just bureaucratic overhead, why cutting my budget would create systemic risk, why the manual processes I was covering existed because we'd never funded proper automation. He nodded, smiled, said he appreciated my diligence, then ignored every word I said. Over the next year, he started dismantling my department piece by piece. Budget requests denied, headcount frozen. My senior analyst reassigned to a different team without consultation. Every time I flagged a compliance gap or regulatory deadline, he'd ask the same question, "Is this urgent right now?" And because I was good at my job, nothing was ever urgent right now. So he stopped taking my concerns seriously. By last December, I was working 60-hour weeks just to keep everything from collapsing, covering gaps that should have been handled by additional staff, running manual compliance checks that should have been automated years ago. I kept telling myself it was temporary, that once the growth phase stabilized, leadership would realize they needed proper risk management. I was wrong. December 10th. I submitted my annual budget proposal for the Internal Controls and Regulatory Compliance Department. Nothing extravagant. Just enough to handle the new state licensing requirements coming in Q1 and bring on one additional analyst. Ryan rejected it the same day. One-line email. We need to revisit headcount allocation before approving budget increases. I requested a meeting to discuss it. No response. I followed up 2 days later. Still nothing. Then, on December 15th, I got a calendar invite. Meeting with Ryan Calloway, December 18th, 45 minutes. Subject line, organizational planning discussion. I thought we were finally going to have a real conversation about compliance needs. We weren't. I walked into that meeting with 14 years of documentation, compliance metrics, risk assessments, evidence of every system I'd built and every fire I'd prevented. I walked out with a severance package and an NDA. Ryan was calm, almost apologetic. He said the company was restructuring, reallocating resources toward revenue-generating functions. That my role, while valued in the past, no longer aligned with their strategic priorities going forward. I asked who would manage compliance operations. He said they were exploring partnerships with external compliance consultants, more cost-effective, more flexible. I asked about the Federal Reserve audit scheduled for mid-January. He said the finance team had it under control. I asked if this decision had anything to do with my recent budget escalations or my pushback on the analyst reassignment. He said no. This was purely a business decision driven by operational efficiency targets. I didn't believe him, but it didn't matter. He handed me the termination paperwork, severance terms, non-disparagement agreement, immediate separation effective end of business day. I signed it, not because I agreed with any of it, but because fighting in that moment would have accomplished nothing. I collected my personal belongings, walked past the holiday decorations in the lobby, past colleagues who had no idea what just happened, past the conference room where I'd spent thousands of hours building the systems that kept this company operational. I drove home, didn't cry, didn't rage, just sat in my living room staring at nothing. My daughter came downstairs and asked if I was okay. I told her work was stressful, but everything would be fine. She didn't look convinced. That night, I thought about everything Ryan didn't know. He didn't know that our compliance database was built on a custom integration I'd designed myself, that no one else had administrative access. The documentation was incomplete because I'd been too busy actually doing the work to formalize every process. He didn't know that our quarterly regulatory filings relied on 3 manual workarounds I executed personally, that automating them would have required the budget approval he'd been denying for 18 months. He didn't know that I'd been quietly covering for gaps in our financial reporting controls since July, that I'd flagged those gaps repeatedly in emails he never read, that leaving them unaddressed created serious audit risk. He didn't know any of it, because he'd never bothered to ask. If you've ever felt invisible at work, like the harder you try, the less people see you. You're not alone. Sometimes the most critical work is the work no one notices, until it stops. December 19th. I didn't go back to the office. Technically, I didn't have an office anymore, but old habits die hard. I checked my email. My work account had been deactivated, but I'd been copied on enough distribution lists that messages were still hitting my personal inbox. 43 unread messages. Most were automated. System alerts from compliance monitoring tools, deadline reminders for upcoming regulatory filings. Nothing urgent, except one. An email from the CFO's office. Subject line, Federal Reserve Bank, preliminary inquiry. I opened it. The Federal Reserve Bank of Chicago was initiating a preliminary inquiry into Meridian's financial reporting practices and internal controls framework. They were requesting comprehensive documentation, full audit trails for the past 18 months, evidence of board oversight, risk management protocols. Submission deadline, January 6th. 18 days away. I read it twice. Then I closed my laptop. Not my problem anymore. December 20th. My phone rang mid-morning. Unknown number. I let it go to voicemail. 2 hours later, it rang again. Same number. This time, I answered. Sarah? A familiar voice. Panicked. It's Melissa Chen. I need help. Melissa. My former senior analyst. The one Ryan had reassigned to a different department back in November. They're asking me to coordinate the Fed response, she said. They want me to pull together all the compliance documentation, but I don't have access to half the systems anymore. And honestly, I don't even understand how the reporting framework is structured. I didn't say anything. I tried talking to Ryan about it, she continued. He told me it's just a matter of organizing the files we already have. He said the Fed does these inquiries all the time and they're mostly formalities. I almost laughed. Formalities. Right. The Federal Reserve doesn't launch preliminary inquiries as formalities. They launch them when they've identified red flags in your regulatory filings, when they have reason to believe your internal controls aren't functioning properly. This wasn't a routine check. This was the beginning of an enforcement process. Melissa, I said carefully, I don't work there anymore. I know, but you're the only person who understands how this stuff works. I'm drowning here. Daniel asked me to reach out and see if you'd be willing to consult or... I can't help you. There was a long pause. Okay, she said quietly. I understand. I hung up. December 23rd, Christmas week. Most of the executive team was out. The office was running on skeleton staff, but the emails kept coming. Not to my work account. They'd deactivated that. To my personal email. Because I was still on half a dozen distribution lists no one had thought to remove me from. Melissa again. Then another analyst from my former department. Then someone from the finance team. All with variations of the same message. We need help. We don't know how to do this. No one else understands the systems you built. I didn't respond to any of them. My daughter asked what I wanted for Christmas. I told her I hadn't thought about it. She said I seemed distracted. She wasn't wrong. December 27th, the office reopened after the holiday break. I still wasn't checking email actively, but notifications kept popping up. Then I got a text message from Daniel Rourke, the CFO. Sarah, can we talk? It's urgent. I ignored it. 3 hours later, my phone rang. Daniel. I didn't answer. He left a voicemail. Look, I know things ended badly with your departure, but we've got a serious situation here. The Fed inquiry is escalating faster than we anticipated. They've moved up the documentation deadline to January 3rd. We need access to systems we can't get into, processes we don't understand. I'm not asking you to come back permanently. I'm just asking you to help us avoid a disaster that could shut this company down. I played the message twice, then I deleted it. December 29th. My phone started ringing at 6:47 in the morning. I was making coffee, still in my bathrobe. My daughter was asleep upstairs. I looked at the screen. Ryan Calloway. I let it ring. Called again at 7:15, then at 8:30, then at 9:05. I turned my phone off. December 30th. I turned it back on around noon. 17 missed calls, 9 voicemails, 26 text messages. Ryan, Daniel, Melissa, the VP of Operations, the head of HR, all saying basically the same thing. Please call us back. We need to talk. This is critical. I scrolled through the messages. One of Ryan's texts caught my attention. Sarah, I understand you're upset about how things ended, but this is bigger than what happened between us. The company is facing potential enforcement action from the Fed. If we don't respond properly to this inquiry, we're looking at penalties that could force us to suspend operations. I'm asking you, not as your former boss, but as someone who genuinely needs help, to please consider assisting us through this. Person to person, person to person. I stared at that phrase for a long time. I thought about all the times I'd asked for help, for budget, for resources, for someone in leadership to take compliance seriously before it became a crisis. I thought about Ryan's dismissive smile in meetings, his one-line email rejections, his refusal to even meet with me to discuss my budget proposal. I thought about 14 years of being the invisible person who kept everything running, and I made a decision. I called my attorney. Her name was Laura Pittman, employment law specialist based in downtown Chicago. I'd consulted with her briefly after my termination to review the severance agreement. She'd told me then that I probably had grounds for a wrongful termination claim if I wanted to pursue it, that eliminating a senior compliance position right before a major regulatory audit looked like retaliation for raising concerns. I hadn't decided yet whether to file anything, but now I told her everything. The calls, the texts, the increasingly desperate messages from people who'd thrown me away 2 weeks earlier. She listened without interrupting. Then she said, "Don't respond to them. Not yet. Let them sit with this for a while." What if the company actually collapses? That's not your responsibility, Sarah. They made a choice. Now they get to live with the consequences. It was my department, my systems. Was, past tense. You don't owe them anything. I knew she was right. But part of me, the part that had spent 14 years protecting that company, felt like I was abandoning something important. Laura must have sensed my hesitation. Listen, she said. You don't owe them anything morally or legally, but if you do want leverage for a potential settlement down the road, now is the time. They're desperate. That means they'll negotiate on your terms. Negotiate what? Whatever you want. Consulting fees, liability protection, a formal acknowledgement that your termination was inappropriate. All of it. I thought about that. Let me think about it, I said. Take your time, Laura said. But don't wait too long. Their crisis has a deadline. December 31st, New Year's Eve. I finally responded to Daniel's messages. One sentence. I'm willing to consult on the Fed inquiry. Send a formal proposal. He replied within 10 minutes. 3-month consulting engagement, same hourly rate as my previous salary. Flexible schedule. I'd work directly with the CFO's office to prepare the documentation package and coordinate the Fed response. I forwarded it to Laura. She called me 20 minutes later. Counter with double your previous rate. A limited scope of work that explicitly excludes any ongoing responsibilities after the inquiry, and full indemnification protecting you from any liability related to past compliance decisions. I drafted the counteroffer and sent it. Daniel agreed to everything by 4 p.m., January 2nd. I walked back into Meridian's offices for the first time since they'd fired me. The lobby looked the same. Modern furniture, glass walls, the company logo backlit on exposed brick. But the energy was different. People moved through the halls with a kind of contained panic, quiet conversations behind closed doors, stress visible on faces, straight to the executive floor. Daniel was waiting in his office. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. Thank you for coming. I didn't respond, just sat down. He pulled up a document on his screen, the formal inquiry letter from the Federal Reserve Bank. It was worse than I'd realized from the initial email. They weren't just requesting documentation. They were questioning the integrity of Meridian's entire internal controls framework. They'd identified specific discrepancies in our financial reporting, gaps in our audit trails, unresolved compliance issues dating back 6 months. 6 months. Exactly when I'd started flagging problems that leadership ignored. How bad is this? I asked. Daniel exhaled slowly. If we don't satisfy their inquiry with comprehensive, credible responses, we're looking at formal enforcement action. Fines in the 7 figures, possibly a suspension of our operating license while they conduct a full examination. Who's been managing compliance since I left? Melissa's been trying to coordinate things, but she doesn't have the technical background. And frankly, we've been operating without proper oversight for 2 weeks. Yes. I leaned back in my chair. Where's Ryan? Daniel hesitated. He's on administrative leave. The board initiated an internal review. They're examining the decision to eliminate your position 2 weeks before a major regulatory event. They're not happy. I didn't say anything. Look, Daniel said, I know this whole situation is complicated, but right now we need your expertise to get through this inquiry. Can you help us? I looked at him for a long moment. I'll fix your documentation package. I'll get you through the Fed inquiry, but after that I'm done. This isn't a long-term engagement. Understood. And I need full access to everything. No limitations, no interference. You'll have it. Good. Let's get started. January 3rd. I spent 18 hours straight rebuilding what should never have been broken in the first place. The compliance database, the audit trails, the risk assessment protocols, everything I'd built over 14 years, everything that had been neglected for 2 weeks. I worked alone in a conference room. Door closed, phone on silent. My daughter texted around midnight asking when I'd be home. I told her soon. It wasn't soon. By 2 a.m, I'd compiled the complete documentation package the Federal Reserve requested. 372 pages, every control procedure, every audit finding, every risk mitigation strategy. I flagged the gaps, the unresolved issues, the places where leadership had ignored my warnings, and I included a detailed timeline showing exactly when I'd raised specific concerns, when I'd submitted budget requests to address them, when those requests had been denied, when I'd been terminated. I sent the package to Daniel at 2:47 a.m. Then I drove home, January 6th. The Federal Reserve accepted our documentation submission. They scheduled a follow-up review meeting for late January, but the immediate crisis was contained. Daniel called me that afternoon. "You saved us, Sarah. I did the job you should have let me do in the first place." There was a pause. "The board wants to talk to you about coming back permanently. We'd reinstate your position, full benefits package, significant salary increase." I didn't respond right away. "Can I think about it?" "Of course. Take whatever time you need." I hung up. I already knew my answer. January 8th. I received an email from a company I'd never heard of. Vanguard Financial Systems, one of the largest fintech companies in the country, headquartered in San Francisco with major operations in New York and Austin. Subject line: VP of Regulatory Strategy, opportunity to connect. They'd heard through industry channels that I was no longer with Meridian. They were building out their regulatory infrastructure ahead of a planned IPO. They needed someone with deep expertise in compliance frameworks, federal regulatory relationships, and audit management. They wanted to talk. The role was fully remote. Significant equity package, comprehensive benefits, base salary $187,000, 23% higher than what Meridian had been paying me. I scheduled the interview call for January 10th. January 10th. The video call lasted 2 hours. I spoke with the chief risk officer, the general counsel, and 2 members of the executive team. They knew my work. They'd seen the compliance infrastructure I'd built at Meridian. They understood what I did, what I was capable of, what I was worth. They asked intelligent questions about regulatory strategy, about building controls that scaled, about managing relationships with federal regulators. They didn't ask if my concerns were urgent right now. They made an offer before the call ended. VP of Regulatory Strategy, full remote, equity vesting over 4 years, unlimited PTO, annual performance bonuses tied to company milestones. I accepted. January 14th. I sent my final consulting invoice to Meridian and a formal letter declining their offer to return as a permanent employee. I explained my reasons in detail. I didn't need to. Daniel called within an hour. "Is there anything we can do to change your mind?" "No." "Can I ask why?" "You can ask." There was a long silence. "I understand," he said finally. "For what it's worth. I'm sorry about how things went down. You deserved better." "Yes, I did. Good luck with whatever comes next." "Thank you." I hung up. And for the first time in years, I felt something that had been missing. Relief. February 1st, my first day at Vanguard. New laptop, new team, new systems. The onboarding process was thorough, professional, respectful. Nobody expected me to be invisible. Nobody questioned whether my work mattered. Nobody treated compliance like an afterthought. My daughter asked how the new job was going. I told her it was good, really good. She said I seemed different, lighter somehow. She was right. I heard through a former colleague that Ryan Calloway was quietly terminated from Meridian in late February. The board brought in external leadership with actual operational experience, restructured the executive team, rebuilt the compliance department with proper funding. Melissa Chen was promoted to Director of Compliance. She reached out to congratulate me on the new role and to thank me for everything I'd taught her. I told her she was going to do great. I meant it. Here's what I learned from all of this. Sometimes you don't realize how much weight you've been carrying until someone finally gives you permission to put it down. I spent 14 years being the person who fixed everything, who anticipated problems, who kept the systems running. And I was so good at it that people forgot I was there. Until I wasn't. The company didn't collapse because I left, but it came close. Close enough that leadership finally understood what they'd lost. Not because they valued me, because they felt the consequences of not valuing me. If you've ever been the person holding everything together, the one people only notice when things start falling apart, know this. Your value doesn't disappear when they stop seeing it. It just means you're finally free to take it somewhere that actually does. Thanks for listening.